actually build heroes in the Hero Construction Company. One word it's pretty hard to avoid these days is the word bully, and more specifically, anti-bully or no bully. We've had in Michigan in the last 2 weeks 2 suicides from school students because of bullying. So there's a lot of talk about getting anti-bullying programs into schools. And that makes a lot of sense, right? We don't want that to happen. But every time I see signs like this when I go into a school, I cringe. And there's 4 reasons for that cringing. I'm going to go through those today and then come out with hopefully a solution at the end. The first problem that I have with anti-bully programs is one of definition. If I was to ask all of you to write down on your little notepads that you got in your bag what bullying is, what behaviors count as bullying, and you all handed them in, I would get nearly 100 different answers. And I did that experiment at a middle school in Troy last year. I had 300 sixth graders, and I asked them all to write what they thought covered or was covered by bullying. And I gave them 3 minutes, only 3 minutes. And they came up with 89 specific different things that were covered by the term bullying. Now this creates a communication problem. If there's 89 different definitions of a word, it's very difficult for us to have conversations about it. I was looking at a school district's website last week looking for their anti-bullying policy because every school district in Michigan now needs to have an anti-bullying policy. Well, I was reading through this policy. It was 2 pages long, and it had 3 distinct parts that defined bullying. And the problem was every definition was different. And this is a school district defining bullying 3 different ways. This is a problem. And it becomes a communication problem when you're trying to talk one-on-one with a student. A lot of these anti-bullying programs will come up with some kind of pledge at the end where everyone gets together, they've been inspired, they don't want bullying in their school anymore, and they pledge. They all make a pledge to not bully. Well, the problem is, if my bullying definition is different to your bullying definition, you don't know what I've just agreed to. For example, if Jim comes up to me, I'm a principal, and says, I promise, across my microphone, that I am not going to bully. They can do that absolutely with honesty and with intent, and turn around and go straight into the hallway and start slinging around gay slurs. And Jim can do that because Jim doesn't think that's bullying. Jim thinks beating somebody up every day is bullying. So this is a problem. There's a very clear definition problem there. The other piece of the definition problem comes from gone completely blank. The other part of the definition is when you have kids being encouraged to talk about bullying. It's really it's a negative term. We're focusing on the negative. So that's the first part. The first part is a definition problem. We're using these different terms. We're using the same term for different things. The solution to that, or a partial solution to that, is to use the specific terms. So instead of asking our class to stop bullying, we can ask the class to reduce or stop physical violence against others. We can talk about name calling. We can talk about meanness. All of those things are specific and understandable, and that's key in that communication. We need to be able to communicate effectively. The second problem that comes with this anti-bully idea is that as adults, we really don't get the problem. And I put full blame on 80s movies. The 80s was a golden age for high school movies. And a feature of those movies, apart from Molly Ringwald, was that there was a bully in every one of those movies. You've got Biff in Back to the Future and all of its sequels. You have all of Daniel's opponents in The Karate Kid. You've got the bad guys in Revenge of the Nerds. and James Spader in general. And what it told us, what it told us was that bullies are kind of these big bad people that are picking on the poor little people. And because most of our teachers have been affected by this golden age of high school movies, and most of our parents, they had this idea that that's what a bully is. Well, it's not the reality, and I know this will be hard to believe that movies are not portraying reality. The reality is that it is a much wider, much more difficult to identify problem. Last year, the New York Times released or published an article that was summarizing a study that was done. And this study asked a bunch of school students to identify the people that were perpetrating these certain behaviors. They didn't just label it as bullying, they broke it down. And they asked who was doing it and who was getting it done to. And what they found was that bullying was happening all across the spectrum, but it was focused on the top 50% of students in the popularity scale. Now, what this tells us is that those kids, those unpopular kids or the nerdy kids, they're really not the main target of bullying. It's the easiest to identify. Bullying is happening in these levels where people are trying to go up the cool ladder. And so if I tease someone or call someone a name or beat someone up, that's going to push them down the ladder, which makes me go up the ladder. And this is what bullying generally is. And as adults, it's really hard for us to understand that. It's why your kid comes home and says that they hate their best friend. So their best friend is on the same ladder, in the same general place on that ladder. And the best friend is going to do these things, not always, but these things happen to get them up the ladder. Part of the issue there is that these adults that have got this definition are the ones that are making policies. They're the ones that are writing up a 2-page description of an anti-bullying policy. One of the interesting pieces that came out of that study was that the top 2% in the popularity stakes were not bullying. So the most popular, the very much most popular, were not doing all of these things, this meanness, this sacrificial lamb kind of behavior. They weren't doing it. And I think that is a golden opportunity for schools to try to embrace, to try to create a partnership with those top 2% to reduce the behavior in the lower 50% or the 50% under them, because those kids have influence. They have massive influence. The third part that, the other thing that wasn't in 80s movies, was the internet. And the internet has changed bullying in remarkable ways. And it's easy, again, as adults who went through bullying as kids to think, well, it's not so bad, I survived. If I get my kid to toughen up a little bit, they'll be okay. And that is a prevailing attitude from adults all across that spectrum, those teachers, those parents, those principals, those administrators. The problem is the internet has made life vicious. If you probably imagine that you understand what the internet has done to bullying, but unless you've seen it, unless you've seen this violent, aggressive, consistent, overwhelming meanness that can come from the internet, you don't know what the kids are going through. And it's a fatal flaw, literally, to assume that a kid can just be tough enough to get over this. So the third piece that is frustrating to me about the anti-bully is that the word bully is a label. And it is creating a subclass of students in our population, in our environment, that is to be disdained. And if you're walking through the halls and you see no bullies, bullies not allowed, ban bullies, block bullies, those kids that have been identified as bullies and labeled as bullies by a large portion of the population are feeling that. So you're creating this environment where those kids don't have a place. They're not welcome as part of this community anymore. That's a problem. The other part comes from the stickiness of this label. This label is incredibly sticky because people talk about it. Students talk to other students about who the bullies are. But more insidious is that it goes to the parents and the teachers as well. Parents talk about who the bullies are in their kids' classes. And they don't just talk about it, they tell their kids to stay away from them. They tell their kids not to invite them to their birthday parties. And again, this is creating a problem for these people that have been identified as bullies. Teachers do it as well. When teachers have a class and they've gone through a year and they're dealing with one kid that is just frustrating them, they tell the teacher above them who's getting that kid, hey, watch out for Billy. He's a bully. It's something that can track right across their schooling career. Part of bullying behavior, all of these different negative social behaviors, comes from an individual's inability to work in a group, especially when they come into school for the first time. A lot of these bullying behaviors are because the bully doesn't know how to act around people. So they might try to dominate them, they might try to push them around, they might try to be mean to them. They're experimenting. And if you push them away, push them outside of this social circle, make socializing even more difficult, what do you think they're going to resort to? The same behaviors that got them into the problem in the first place. It's a sucking spiral for these kids once they've been identified. And I want to tell you something incredibly sad. I know a boy in kindergarten who, it's January, he's already been identified as a bully. This is a kid in kindergarten who's never socialized with a group more than 2 or 3 people his own age, is put into a classroom of 20 plus kids and doesn't know how to interact with them, doesn't know how to play effectively, doesn't know how to converse effectively, and so is experimenting, as I said. And this is a 5-year-old kid. Now what's happening is the parents of the kids that are getting targeted by this kid have labeled him a bully. And those parents have called the school and said, what are you doing about this kid that's a bully? And the trap that a lot of schools fall into is they say, we have a zero tolerance policy on bullying. A zero tolerance policy on a kindergartner trying to interact in his classroom. A zero tolerance policy on a word that an entire school district can't even get a definition for. So this zero tolerance policy essentially is farcical. You cannot enforce a zero tolerance policy on something that is defined differently by all sorts of people. So think about that stickiness of that kindergarten kid. Next year, he's a bully. 2nd grade, he's a bully. 12th grade, he's a bully. That's going to affect him for the rest of his life. These labels are sticky. The 4th piece is that anti-bullying is a negative approach. We're focusing on a negative behavior. We're focusing on trying to stop something negative. And I'd like to talk about focusing on something positive. I worked at a YMCA camp for 12 years. And when I got there, I was a counselor, measly counselor. And we were taught, make rules for the kids. Write them down. If you can, write them down the first night that the kids are there. And we were given examples of the rules, and sometimes we even asked the kids to contribute to the rules. And all the rules started with don't. Don't go to the waterfront by yourself. Don't throw sticks. Don't run off by yourself. It was a whole series of don'ts. And kids were so conditioned by this point to do that that they jumped right in. Yeah, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. The problem with don't rules, let me tell you the problem, I should tell you an example of the problem with don't rules. So I'm walking with my cabin of kids, and Joe throws a rock. And I say, Joe, remember our rule was don't throw rocks. And Joe says, well, that was a pebble. So, okay, when we get back to the cabin, we're going to write another rule that says don't throw pebbles. So then he throws stones. So we have to write don't throw rocks, don't throw pebbles, don't throw anything rock-like. Don't throw sticks, don't throw squirrels. This list of rules all of a sudden takes up an entire wall of the cabin. And so, you know, camp is a great place to experiment. And that sounds really bad now that I've just said it. But camp, I was able to experiment with what worked and what didn't work. And it was pretty clear early on that don't rules didn't work. And when I became the summer camp director, I decided, look, I'm going to throw all these rules out. I'm going to create camp-wide rules, and they're going to be positive. So instead of don't throw 16 different things, it was leave it on the ground. So rule number 1, leave it on the ground. So if it's on the ground, you leave it. Then you won't be able to throw it. So obviously, there were some other things that they could probably throw, like each other, but that covered a whole lot of things, and it was positive. We also had love your feet. So instead of don't go here without any shoes on, don't go here, but you can go here and you can't, it was just love your feet. Take care of your feet and we'll all be fine. Leave the wild things to be wild. So that covered don't throw squirrels. And so there was this transformation at the camp because kids understood the rules and they understood the reasons. But even more importantly, the counselors understood the reasons. And they were very easy rules to reference. There are only 9 of them. I called them the Big 10 rules, and not one kid questioned why there are only 9. Because I didn't number them. That was a moment, it was a source of great pride that we went through the whole summer and no one questioned why there were only 9 rules. But it was easy for everyone to remember. It was easy for people to make happen. So I'd like to focus the approach on something positive. So my formula is that a pro-hero school is greater than an anti-bully school. And so let me give you a definition of hero so that I'm not falling into the same trap as bully. A hero is someone who does something for the good of others despite a risk or sacrifice. And my work and the schools that I work with is in creating kids who will stand up when they see something wrong, anything wrong. And the advantage of this is that you don't have to bring in an anti-bully program, an anti-vandalism program, an anti-apathy program. Heroes take care of those things by themselves. If you build a school of heroes, you're not going to deal with kids vandalizing the toilets. You're not going to deal with kids beating each other up. You're not going to deal with people insulting each other or calling people names or sending naked texts of each other. And that stuff is going to just disappear because the heroes take care of it themselves. If principals and superintendents were able to take care of bullying with a magic wand, they would have waved that magic wand long ago. We need the school body to take action to fix whatever's happening. We need to create positive school environments because positive school environments are self-fulfilling. When those new kids come in from the elementary school to the middle school or the middle school to the high school and they see that environment, they conform. One of the great tools we have in dealing with humans is that they conform. So if we can set up an environment that is already where we want it to be, it's going to be self-perpetuating. So I would like to propose that we start creating pro-hero schools rather than anti-bullying schools. Thank you very much.